We go. Hi, welcome to another edition of In the Clubhouse. I'm your host, Bob Busser, and this is my partner, Rick Bender.
Bob, thanks for having me back. It's great. I really enjoy these.
Oh, thanks, Rick. It's great having you on here. It's nice to have another voice. Today, we're going to delve into baseball writing from a longtime ESPN writer and Fox Sports writer and SB Nation writer and the Saber writer, Rob Neyer. He's written several books, and he wrote the book with Dale Scott that came out last year. That's been doing really well. So, Rob, welcome to the program.
It's delightful to be here. Thank you.
Rob, how was it writing with Dale?
Well, Dale was a dream to work with. I have, for a long time, wanted to write a book with a baseball notable, a figure. Uh, if only because I wanted to see if I could do it. When you grow up reading baseball books, as I did, and continue reading baseball books throughout your life, as I have, you read a lot of as told to memoirs and autobiographies, some of which are fantastic, most of which are okay, and some of which are terrible. But you can't help but wonder, as a writer, could I do that? So many of my colleagues in the business have worked on books like that. And I had always hoped that I would get a chance to do it with the right person someday. I didn't go out pushing, but it tends to be historically, aside from the famous Peter Golenbach, it tends to be beat writers, newspaper columnists who have existing relationships with that person. I should mention another one, Lonnie Wheeler, who's done a bunch of them, was not one of those people, but a lot of them are. It's not an easy business to get into if you're a blogger, which is basically what I was for a significant portion of my writing career. But this is a long answer to your question. I was very fortunate that when I was working on my book Powerball, uh, there was literally one umpire I really wanted to talk to based on something I wanted to write about in the book. And that umpire was Dale Scott. He agreed to meet with me in spring training and gave me, I don't know, 3 hours. And he's all over the book. He was fantastic. And I thought to myself, they would be a great subject for a book. I'd love to read that book, even if I have nothing to do with it. Um, and I think I floated the idea to him, and he said he'd thought about it, but wasn't really interested. And so I just let it go. And then 2 years later, I heard from a mutual friend that Dale had asked him if he knew anybody who might want to work with him on a book. And my friend, our friend, texted me that night and said, "You should check in with Dale." I did. And, within a few, I don't know, weeks, months, whatever it was, we had agreed to work on the book together. And he could not have been a better collaborator. He was always available when I wanted to record with him. We would record on, we decided to do the book shortly before March of 2020. I think we did maybe one short interview and then COVID hits. So now we shift to, I will just dial up Dale on my laptop on Skype, and I'll hit the record button and we'll go from there. And he was almost always available to record for an hour, hour and a half at a time. Uh, I had a long list of subjects for him. I read basically every book by or about umpires that had ever been published. So I had a long list of subjects. We got to probably 75, 80% of those subjects. And then I realized we've already got way more than enough for a book. So, there's probably enough material for a second Dale Scott book, but he could not have been better. I'd send him a completed chapter. He would review it that day or the next day, come back with great notes, corrections. He just was an absolute dream to work with. And I really had a fantastic time working with him on the book. And honestly, and I can say this because it's really his book, I am extremely pleased with how it turned out. And I give all the credit to Dale.
Dale is an upstanding, upstart guy. He and I, we've known each other probably 3 or 4 years now. We met through Facebook, and he's always, whenever we want to do something, he's always there. He's ready to go. So,
Mhm.
and Jimmy Joyce told me something too. He goes, I've been burned by a lot of guys. He goes, Rob, I trust Rob. And he goes, I trust you, Bobby. You guys aren't going to burn me. I said, no, why would I want to? I don't do that kind of journalism.
Right.
That's just not, that's it. Let somebody else be that guy, it just doesn't interest me.
Rob, I was going to
You,
ask Rob, you started working under Bill James when you were first getting started, I believe. And yeah, as a researcher mostly, if I'm not mistaken, how did you get your start into writing from there, just doing the researching and Bill, kind of bringing you into the fold there?
You're right. I started with Bill as I think that the title was probably research assistant.
Mhm.
I don't remember. I wish I still had that. I probably have it somewhere. I think he dropped a note into a publication he did then called the Baseball Analyst. I think that's what it was called. I actually have. They're all online. Actually, Saber has acquired them, and you can read them on the web. Sometime in 1988, Bill dropped a note into the Baseball Analyst saying that he was looking for a research assistant, and our again mutual friend. I rely on a lot of mutual friends. Our mutual friend Mike Cope, who had written a number of essays in Bill's abstracts, um, told me I should apply. And my first reaction was, why would I want to apply for that job? There's no way Bill would ever hire me. I'm just this huge fan. I was a Bill James super fan, but I had no real qualifications other than that. And having read a number of baseball books, I was a lousy student. At the time, I was roofing houses. I think the one thing I had going for me is that I lived near Bill. So he would have to pay to relocate me. Maybe he saw something else. When ultimately I did send him a letter, we got together for an interview at a restaurant, and and I think that was basically it. I sent him a letter. We had the interview. A couple months later, he called me and said he would like to hire me, and that was obviously it was the formative or the key moment in my professional life, because I honestly don't think that I would have ever wound up working in baseball or in writing if Bill hadn't hired me, because my life was simply not heading in that direction.
wow. But it goes to show you, like in this business, especially media, you got to be in the right place at the right time.
Yes, you have to be
Absolutely.
you have to be the right place there, and ideally you're ready. I was not ready. I mean, I ready would have been gotten some training in college, graduated from college. I had dropped out. I having writing something. I hadn't done any of those things. So, now since then, there have been a bunch of times when something came along and I was ready for it. That one, no. That was just, there was a lot of luck involved there. And to answer your question about moving from research to writing, Bill was very generous. I hadn't written much. I hadn't written anything outside of college term papers, basically. And Bill, after a few months, um, said, "Can you draft this article for the next book, whatever it was?" And my early writing was horrible, and he was not shy of telling me so. But he also gave me instruction on how to be better. Not that I got to be great, but I think I was useful to Bill as a writer. A lot of the things I wrote wound up in his books during those 4 years, edited by Bill, of course. But I did get a lot of experience, and that's what led to the job at Stats Inc. and then to the job at ESPN and so on and so forth.
What's been your favorite job that you've had?
Wow.
I know that's a loaded question.
Uh, gosh. I think I don't think I could choose a favorite job aside from working for Bill. That was literally my dream job. If you had asked me at any time in 1984, 5, 6, or 7, or early 88, if you could choose one job in the universe, what would it be? It literally would have been working for Bill James.
Wow.
Now, there were a lot of uncomfortable moments working for Bill because I was not prepared for the job. Um, I was intimidated by Bill, but there were a lot of tremendous moments during those 4 years. But I think that I would go back to each of the jobs that I've had, and I would probably identify opportunities at those jobs as my favorites. The chance to spend a lot of time with Bill Murray's teammates on the 1978 Grays Harbor Loggers. It was just so much fun talking to those guys about that summer that had basically been completely forgotten by everybody who wasn't actually there in 1978 for that season. And I think the big regret that I have about my 15 years at ESPN is that I didn't take advantage of opportunities like that I would have had if I had really pushed. But what I wound up enjoying more than anything, I loved doing research, going back and digging through the archives to find information. And I've gotten to do that at writing books mostly and while working for Bill. And I love talking to people and telling stories. And the worst thing about not having full-time employment as a writer, which has been the case for the last 8 years now, is that I miss the steady income and the benefits. That's a bummer. But I have used that time and felt sort of the incentive to go out and search out for stories that I could sell as a freelancer. And I've had more fun working on those stories than any other writing I've done, except for a few things here and there in books. So I really wouldn't say that I've had a favorite job, but there have been great things in all of them.
Did you take journalism at Kansas?
Another wasted opportunity. Did not. Great J school. Didn't come near it.
It's funny how many people go to college and they graduate and they don't go with their degree, like they may be an engineer or something like that, whatever, mechanical engineering. They go a completely different path. You know what I mean? It's my nephew is he's a 3.5-year senior at Sacramento State, and he's interning with the Reno Aces this summer. So, he's thrilled to death. He wants to be a broadcaster. So he's getting in to sit with the broadcast, he's shadowing the broadcaster and he's helping out, sitting next to him. And he's like a kid in a candy store. And I cannot be happier for him. He's a great kid. And
sounds like a great job.
Oh yeah. I mean,
or a great internship.
20 years old. He's going to turn 21 in a few weeks and he's going to be in Reno. So I hope he saves his money. But he's a mini me. He's always had a bat and a ball in his hands. And all of us, Rick, you and I, Rob, we're all baseball fans. And I go back to the early to mid 60s with the Dodgers and Sandy Koufax. So I'm like you and Rick, we've seen it all. I mean, I've seen stuff that I've never seen before. It's like every time you can find something new with baseball. And that's what makes it fun. Let's talk about your. We have to address him as the commissioner, Rick, because he's the commissioner of the West Coast League, Collegiate Baseball League. How did you get involved with that?
Well, you talk about the right time and the right place. This might be the best example in my career. I was just about to finish my book Powerball. This would have been in the early spring of 2018. And I was asked to give a talk at a local baseball banquet here in Portland. It's the Old Timers Baseball Association here in Portland. They get together every year. They have a few speakers. They invite a bunch of coaches, high school players who are getting awards, pretty much anybody who is really involved in the local baseball scene is invited, and they get a couple hundred people every year. I was invited to give a talk, just sort of in my, guise as a semi-historian of the game, amateur historian, I should say. And I gave a talk about the subject was essentially baseball as our national pastime, and addressing the question. The subtext was: is baseball really dying or dead, as so many people have been saying for, as you guys know, for more than a century now. It goes back. I actually found a quote. It goes back to the 1880s. Baseball's dying. So not a new story, but it comes up over and over again. And so I addressed that in my talk, wrote the speech, and in the crowd or in the audience was the man Dan Siegel, who runs the Corvallis Knights in the West Coast League. And at that moment, the West Coast League just happened to be looking for basically a part-time commissioner figurehead, as Dan described the job to me when we met a couple weeks later. And he just seeing me up on the stage, I suppose, for whatever reason, gave him the idea that I might be a good fit. The job, as he described it, wasn't administrative, so it didn't really require me to do anything I hadn't done before. Essentially, promote the league on social media, which I've done lots of different sorts of things. Maybe write a few releases, stories for the league. Maybe Dan said there might be one or two over the course of the season disputes with the umpire. You might need to deal with something like that. That turned out to be an understatement. But it really didn't seem like it was going to be all consuming or even semi consuming. Just a fun thing to do this summer. And my book was almost finished. It would be published, or I was needed to, literally, my deadline was the night of or the night before the first game in the West Coast League season. So basically, finish the book, be commissioner for a few months, and then try to find something else to do with your life. And I skipped the part where Dan recommended me off, and I met with all the owners in the league, and they offered me the job, and I said, sure. I certainly did not anticipate how much work would be involved that first summer. I did not anticipate how much trouble I would get into as commissioner. I did not anticipate still being here 6 years later. So it's been a great opportunity. In terms of what I mentioned before, always something to enjoy in each job. You don't expect, I think I never expected that when I was in my 50s, I would wind up in a role for which I had no preparation, had never thought about doing, and had to learn on the fly over and over again. And I still learn new things. And it's mostly about just dealing with people. I don't manage, I only have a couple of part-time employees. And so I don't manage people. I collaborate with people. There are 17 teams. Every one of those has an owner or two or three. Everyone has a GM, often an assistant GM. I work with all these people. So the number is it's somewhere between 45 and 60, the people that I work with on a regular basis. And I never managed more than 2 or 3 people or worked with more than two or three people at a time. So it's all been a wonderful learning experience for me. And that's been the most enjoyable thing, is just having to grow, which I thought I was finished with a long time ago.
So you're a commissioner, and people always like to say, if you were a baseball commissioner, how would you fix baseball? And there have been things changes in the game these days. Whether it's the clock and other innovations. What things has Major League Baseball done well? What things would you like to see them do, or at least try? And are they doing any experimentation in the collegiate summer leagues as well?
Well, we don't. We adhere pretty closely to the NCAA baseball rules, because we are a training ground for collegiate players.
Sure.
And we don't want them doing anything in the summer that they haven't just done in the spring or won't do in the fall and fall ball and all those things. So, we can tinker around the edges a little bit with a few things, but for the most part, the game you see on our field will be the same you would see at a Division I university. If you don't mind the plug, I wrote extensively about what baseball should do in the Powerball book that I mentioned. Now, that book came out in the fall of 2018, so it's pretty dated. I will say this, I want to give MLB credit. A lot of the issues that I identified in that book, MLB has since then acknowledged, and they've done some things. I said the game was too slow. They worked on that. quite a bit. They fixed that part
Mhm.
basically. I don't recall if I wrote with any optimism. I think my general sense was that they're not going to do anything because they don't want to annoy the union. But they did annoy the union multiple times. And the game for me, I know there are a few skeptics out there, but they seem to be in a tiny minority of people who think it was better when the game was 3 hours long as opposed to 240. I mean, now that most people have experienced it, they prefer the quicker pace. Um, so, I don't agree with everything that baseball or Rob Manfred has said or done over the last 6 years, but boy, they really seem to nail that one. Um, the other thing that I wrote about quite a bit was the paucity of batted balls in play, and of course, the corresponding rise in the strikeout rate. Um, they have acknowledged that that's an issue. They haven't been able to figure out how to fix it, but they do agree there's an issue. And if I could change anything, I would work on that, which they are working on, but they can't just snap their fingers and fix it because of the union, various other reasons. I just think you've got to do some things like tinker with the strike zone, potentially lower the mound. Um, those would be the two big ones. Um, you need to, if you want more batted balls in play, you need fewer strikeouts, and you don't want more walks. So you need to make it tougher on the pitchers to strike batters out, but you've also got to give the pitcher something, or every game's going to be 8-6. And you can do that by changing the strike zone a little bit. And the nice thing is the technology is all there now. They measure literally every single possible thing you can measure with the high-speed cameras, the radars, etc. So it wouldn't be that hard to work through some of these things. And I think they're beginning that process, but it starts in the minor leagues. And they're trying.
What um MLB has done some good things because I talked to Jim and Dale about this, and they were all for speeding up the game because if they saw they had the Red Sox Yankees on their schedule, they knew it
Four
didn't
hours.
matter.
Yeah,
For minimum 4 hours, sometimes 5 hours, and
right.
standing out there for 5 hours, you get tired,
Yeah,
and if you got the plate, man, you're wiped.
right,
But that is a good thing because a lot of people on the East Coast, they don't want to stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning to watch a baseball game.
right.
You know, I mean, I'm glad they did that, but there are some things sabermetrics, some of the stuff I don't really agree with. Like, they talk about launch angle and, exit velocity. Okay, I get it, but that to me,
Well, yeah, but that's not something baseball has done. That's something that the teams have done,
right.
and that the issue I have with those things, and I wrote about this in the book too, is I don't find it. It's just a matter of interest. Is it interesting that this exit velocity was 108 and this one was 106? I just saw that it was a line drive, right? I don't need the number to tell me it was a line drive or that it went out that far. I think that the broadcasters, that's who I blame. They're the ones who are leaning on those numbers. Baseball is always going to have the numbers for their own evaluation purposes. The teams are going to have the numbers. The problem is when it leaks out into the broadcast and doesn't add anything. But there have always been broadcasters who told us things that don't add to our knowledge. And this is just it's just the modern example of that. But I'd love to hear less about launch angle and exit velocity when I'm listening to a game on the radio.
Yeah, because the thing about that is that you don't have, the average fan doesn't have any context as to what that actually means.
Right.
It's like 25 degrees or 27 degrees. It's who cares? It
Yes.
doesn't really matter about that. Now, you talk about the exit velocity and what's the hardest hit ball. Okay, Shohei Ohtani hit a ball 119 miles an hour. That's interesting. Sure, it's the hardest
Yes.
hit ball. We have that. But once you start parsing it beyond that, there isn't a whole lot there to
Right.
worry about.
That's right. It's just a crutch. And Vin Scully had that famous quote about using statistics as a crutch, or there's a lamppost involved in there somehow. I can't remember. But anyway, he was right then, and he's right now. It isn't statistics can't be useful or interesting. It's just that too many broadcasters don't know the difference.
That's the thing with Vinny. I mean, I grew up in the 60s. I was a transistor radio kid in the 60s listening to Vin. And he had a way of telling stories without getting into the stats, where Ross Porter, the Dodgers radio guy, was the stat guy. He always had stats and stuff. But Vinny just told the stories, which growing up with Vin, and we also had Dick Enberg in Anaheim. They were great storytellers, and that's what you want from a broadcast. You don't need all the stats, all the mind-numbing stats over and over again, because it takes for me, I don't know about you, Rick and Rob, it takes away from the game when there's too many stats. It's like, just play the game,
You have to find the right balance. That's really what it comes down to, is that
Exactly.
statistics have their place. Obviously, baseball has a lot of statistics, and that's one of the things that always drew me to the game. I mean, I was a math major in college, and I ended up in communication. So, but I got into it because of the stats. I would do stats at different sporting events. And baseball, I always said baseball is the best sport because it's got the most stats. But again, you have to find the relevant stats and the stats that have meaning. RBIs by themselves, nice, but what's the context? How many opportunities do they have? That's more important. Those sorts of things. And Bill James and really helped bring those things to light. I remember playing Stratomatic as a kid, and my dad would add up the points on everybody's card to figure out who's got the best card. And part of that is walks, because you don't want to make outs. So that's, on base percentage. I was learning that as a 7, 8-year-old back in the 70s. And, it came to the forefront later. But finding the important stats, or the stats that really help you evaluate and understand the game, that's where the key comes in.
Yeah, I think broadcaster for me has three jobs: set the scene, especially on the radio; entertain me. John Miller makes me laugh all the time. That's great. There are very few John Millers out there. Bob Uecker entertains me. Uh, and educate me, make me smarter. And if you're not doing ideally all three of those things, but at least one of them, then you're just wasting my time. And there are about, I don't know, 6 to 8 radio broadcasts out of 30 that I literally can't listen to because the broadcasters don't do any of those things.
Either that, or they don't shut up. They just keep going on and on
Right.
and on and on. It's like, just call the game.
Right.
A
Yep.
perfect example. I don't want to ruffle feathers, but we watched the Red Sox game the other night, and they had Kevin Millar on as a color guy. My God, he would not shut up. You know where I'm going with this. And it was all about him. When he was with the 04 Sox, okay, we get it. It's like, talk about something else. We've heard these stories 1,000 times. That's why I liked Jerry and Don when they were with the Red Sox.
Mm-hmm.
They were funny, they were entertaining, and they told you, they painted the picture. Like Vince Scully said, he paints a picture which he did better than anybody. That's how I got into stadiums, was when I was 6 years old. Vin talking about Connie Mack Stadium, Ebbets Field, Forest Field, all these places, and I'm like, I got to see these places. Because as a kid, it's fascinating. When they paint the picture, some of these broadcasters, you're glued to the radio broadcast. It's under your pillow, and you're listening intently as a 7 or 8-year-old. And
I still do that, by the way, under the pillow.
You do?
Oh yeah, they're all on my phone. The phone goes under the pillow, and I listen that way. So yeah, I did it when I was 10, and I do it now.
What about you, Rick?
Oh yeah, I don't still do it, but I grew up in Chicago, and so I would watch the Cub games on WGN. I'd watch White Sox games, but my dad raised me a Yankee fan, so when the Yankees would play in the area, I'd do whatever I could to listen to those games. And when they played Milwaukee, we could pick up the Milwaukee station so I could listen to Bob Uecker call the games, and that was fantastic. When you're 11, 12 years old, to be able to listen to those games when you could only see one game a week, and it probably isn't going to be your team. Even the Yankees, they weren't on every week back then. So yeah, it's great. Even as a Yankee fan living in New England, I can watch NESN and listen to Jerry and Don. Back when Don was there, that when they were on the air, and I could watch the Red Sox game and enjoy it, even though I don't root for the Red Sox. Because they made the game enjoyable. That's really what it's about.
Yeah,
Well,
and I'll listen to Mariners games a lot, but otherwise, I am choosing my game, my radio game, based purely on the broadcasters. And ideally, it's a close game toward the end. But that's how I choose at this point in my life as a fan. It's okay. Who am I going to be listening to? who's going to be piped into my ears if I have my earbuds in? Because they better be good, or I'm just going to be mad all the time because these people aren't teaching me anything.
That's how I feel when I'm watching college baseball on ESPN Plus nowadays. I just get so it's like, don't tell me that. I don't need to know that. Just get to this. Tell me what's going on, you know? So, yeah.
When I went to Dartmouth, that's how I met Rick, was in September 2018. I emailed him and called him and I said, I'm going to come by. I want to photograph your campus. The facility said, come on down. So I met Rick. He was so nice. We hit it off right away. So I go to the baseball field. This honest to God true story. And they had the players were out there with the coach. And the coach is really a gruff old time coach. He goes, what the hell are you doing down here? Because I was on the field. And I said, Rick Bender said I could go. Oh, okay. So he had the guys. I was a catcher in high school, so I knew exactly where he was going. He was having everybody pick up the trash off the field, and they were grumbling. The players were pissed beyond belief. And I looked at him and I winked at him and I said, I know why you're doing this, the picking up the trash. And he winked back and he goes, these blankety blanks aren't going to hit until this place is policed. That was, and I said, I know why you're doing this with discipline, because most kids, they just want to grab the bat and start hitting, and to be a successful player, you just don't hit. You got to have all facets of the game going on. You got to take the fielding practice, which they don't do anymore in the majors. They don't have fungos or infield, which as a kid we loved seeing that, like at the Dodger games or whatever. That was fun.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It was great working with Bob Whalen at Dartmouth too, because he's been there 35 years, but he grew up. His father was a scout for the Pirates, and signed some pretty notable players. And Bob was he was a bat boy for the Pirates in the late 60s, early 70s. So Clemente and Stargell and all those guys, and he has some great stories about those days as well.
Yeah, for me, Clemente had the best arm I've ever seen. That guy had a howitzer and a half. And he was just fun. If he would have been playing in New York or Chicago or Boston or LA, he would have been up there with Willie Mays. And he was in my eyes, but he didn't get the pub that a lot of those guys get in the other big cities. And it's too bad, but he's still, to me, he's a Hall of Famer. And he's a Hall of Fame person too.
Yeah.
So, what's
You know,
your next
Rob,
Go ahead,
go
brother.
ahead.
No, go ahead.
Rob, I mentioned I grew up a Yankee fan, and growing up in the late 70s, early 80s, of course, I hated the Royals. And I know, you being a Royals fan, it's interesting that, as I read your stuff on ESPN, and then, ESPN, and then you also had Rob and Ronnie on the Royals, I started reading more of that stuff. I actually became pretty good. Man, I like the Royals. I enjoy the Royals because of your writing and because of, it was something that was written about. It was good writing and it was fun to read. So that kind of piqued my interest in with the Royals and kind of gradually turned my tide to that. Talk a little bit about, writing about the Royals specifically. And, they had some good years, certainly when you were younger, and then a long drought there until the mid 2010s.
Right. Well, the Royals, Bill James is how I became a baseball writer, how I got to, how I was lucky enough to get to do what I do for a living and have now for a long, long time. The Royals are what made me a baseball fan. When I was a small child, i.e., up until the age of 7 or 8 or 9, I just loved playing all sports. Didn't matter. Didn't really pay much attention to actual teams except for the Minnesota Vikings, because when I was small, we lived up in Vikings country and everybody loved the Vikings because they were really good. And my hero was Fran Tarkenton. But we didn't have the same baseball sort of thing going on. The Twins were just sort of there, at least as I remember it. But when I was almost 10, my family moved to the Kansas City area. And this was in the spring of 1976. And the Royals were everything. It was infectious. And that age, 9, 10, 11, 12, they've done studies. That's basically the perfect age to become obsessed with a baseball team, probably any sports team, but I became obsessed with the Royals almost like the day we moved there, because it was just sort of the thing to do and they were so good. And I started reading Sports Illustrated every week and reading the evening newspaper for the previous night's box score. And I always, I didn't want, if I went to bed before the game was over, I had to know first thing in the morning who won. And that started again almost, within a few weeks after, as I remember anyway, after moving to Kansas City. And I was hooked. I mean, there were years in my teens when I did not miss a single game all season. I either went to the game myself, I listened on the radio, I watched on TV. I wouldn't make plans to do anything if there was a game. I was one of those fans. Um, and it was tough in the late 70s. I cried a few times because the Yankees beat them in the playoffs. Um, skipping ahead many years, um, when Randy and I started writing about the Royals, it was basically just because I was still obsessed with the Royals and I couldn't write about them every day at ESPN.com. Nobody wanted that. So I wanted this other outlet, and Randy joined me. We'd have this back and forth. And I have no memory for how long we did that. If I had to guess, I would say 3 or 4 years. It might have been 2, it might have been 6. I really don't know. But the reason it ended was because they kept doing things year after year that I thought were wrong, making stupid moves, uh, signing people like Chuck Knobloch and Roberto Hernandez as if they were going to save the team, and super frustrating. Even when they had good players like Mike Sweeney and Carlos Beltran, they still couldn't pitch, and I would blame it on the pitching coach, who turned out to be one of the great pitching coaches of all time, um, Brent Strom. He was their pitching coach for a couple years when they were just awful, and he still to this day gives me crap about mocking him in Rob and Randy on the Royals. Uh, uh, and I've apologized, but he still remembers that, even though it's been whatever it is now, 25 years, 30 years. Maybe 30? No, 25.
Yeah.
Ish. I finally had to stop because I realized I was negative all the time. Every time I wrote, I was being negative and writing how unhappy I was to be a Royals fan, and so I had to bow out. Randy stuck with it, and he was still a fan when they won in 2015. I wasn't. They'd lost me at some point between 2002 and 2007. They lost me as a fan. So I watched the postseason runs in 2014 and 15 as a very detached sort of baseball fan. I appreciated the story. It was a great story. They weren't that good. People forget that. But they were not good in 2013. They were pretty good in 2014, almost won the World Series. They were pretty good in 2015, won the World Series, and then they were not very good again in 2016. I've argued, without any numbers to support this, that they are the worst team in history to go to 2 World Series in a row, based on the quality of the seasons before and after, and also the quality of the seasons during those years. But they did it. And that's an amazing story. Who cares how good they were? What's interesting is what a great story they were. And they were a great story. It would have been, I would love to have been a fan in those years, but I just wasn't. And, it's a regret, but I can't control it. It just happened. And then that was it. I couldn't get back in, even though I wanted to.
I'm going to do something different here. We got a few minutes left. If there is, we all agree there are way too many stats and things like that. If there is something you could change about the perception of hitters or pitchers or the way the game is progressed to what it is now, where it's like throw it as hard as you can or for as long as you can, we don't care. What would you change about the game to kind of bring it back to the way it used to be? Not guys that, every guy throws 98 plus now, and they only last 2 years because their arm is shot. What would you change, Rob, to kind of bring it back without the specialties of today's game? Like you got, relief pitchers, they got 8 guys in the bullpen, you pitch 5 innings. What would you change about it?
Well, First of all, I'm a little reluctant to suggest something that has absolutely zero chance of happening, but I will. And then I'll go to something that I think actually might happen, and it's gonna surprise you. That I think the suggestion might not surprise you. It might surprise you that I think it might happen. But the thing that will not happen is smaller rosters. You mentioned specialization. I think larger rosters, it's great for the players. It's bad for the fans.
Yeah.
It leads to more pitching changes. It leads to managers being less creative. Uh, it just makes for a less interesting game, I think. Um, they're not using that extra spot on a pinch runner, which could be fun. If every team had a Herbie Washington, I'm not saying I want to watch that, but it would be interesting to see what happened. Um, but even though MLB does limit the number of pitchers you can have on your staff, it's not a particularly effective limit. So smaller roster or at least fewer pitchers. I don't think it's coming because there's nothing. If you look at the way the game's evolving and you listen to what baseball people say, if anything, the rosters are going to grow, not shrink. So I don't think there's any chance of that happening in the next however many years. Here's a crazy idea that might not be as crazy as it sounds. And this is not my idea. My friend Owen King wrote about this a few weeks ago on Substack, and I've heard a couple other people suggest something like this. The specifics are different, can be different, but the basic idea is that pitchers are limited to a certain number of pitches over a number in not in pitches thrown, but in speed. You only get one. I think Owen's thing was one pitch over 95 per 10 pitches. Some people want to tie spin rate into it. That's another issue. And some people think that's leading to injuries is all the spin rate. You only get so many pitches above a certain spin rate, or you don't get any above a certain spin rate. If it's above a certain spin rate, if it's 100 miles an hour, or if the spin rate is over 2,600, I don't know the relevant numbers, but over 20, it's just a ball, right? I mean, they have rules like that in softball. Some softball leagues, you get 2 home runs, and the third one over the fence is an out. So it's not as if nobody's ever thought of these things before, but it's short of lowering the mound or something else. If you want fewer pitcher injuries and you want more batted balls in play, you've got to do something to limit the effectiveness of the pitches. And there are 1,000 ways to get there. And the trick is figuring out which ones not only would work, but which ones are palatable to a critical mass of baseball people, players, executives, media, whoever. But I really think that the pitching side of the game is going to look different in 5 years than it looks now because of strikeout rates. And now people are talking about the injury rates more than they ever have before. And I think that combination, we want to keep the pitchers healthy. We want our ace to throw 180 or 200 innings and not 140 or 0 if he tears his elbow ligament. There have to be some things that we can do. And we've seen baseball be pretty aggressive the last 5 years with some changes that people did not see coming. Talked about, but said can't happen. Too hard. Wasn't too hard. They did it. And the game is better for it. So I'm actually more optimistic about the future of the game as a spectator sport than I was 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
I think there are we're all roughly in the same age group, us three here. I think there's less characters in the game than there were, 20, 30 years ago. Each team had a Mickey Hatcher, or a Jay Johnstone who were just completely nuts, and they kept the club loose. Now you've got the guys on their cell phones talking to their agent. It's a lot different than it was when we were kids. Because you never knew what Mickey Hatcher was going to do, or Bly11 or any of these guys, because they were going to do something to Urkel Lasorda, Rich Key's the former Dodger photographer. He's a buddy of mine. He told me this story about Don Sutton. He said Lou Brock came up to the plate and Doug Harvey was a plate umpire. And Lou's complaining, this is the start of the game. And Lou's like, Doug, I think Sutton's doing something to the ball. You got to go out and check him. And he's like, I don't want to start the game like that. But Lou is insistent. So Doug goes out there and he goes, Don, show me your glove. And he looks at Joe and he sees a piece of paper in the finger. And on the paper it was written, "You're getting warmer," because Don was known as a doctor at the ball, and they had pranked him. And Doug Harvey took it with a grain of salt. He thought it was pretty funny, but I mean, they don't that stuff doesn't happen anymore. Like back in the day when we were kids, and I really miss that because it shows that these guys have a sense of humor, and back in the day it wasn't all about the Benjamins, which it is today, and everybody's worried about how much money they're going to make. And that's fine, but I mean, how many houses do you really need? I don't know.
I think it was easier. It was easier to be a character back in the day, mainly because with social media and cell phones that are so prevalent that you can make one quarter misstep doing something and get lambasted for it. Whereas in the old days, you didn't worry about those things. If I had grown up with social media, I don't even want to think about the trouble that I would be in nowadays. So I think that's part of it. That just making sure that you've got to be careful with your image, and because with social media, it's so easy for that to go awry very quickly.
I think too, another factor, and I wouldn't disagree that there are fewer characters publicly. I do think that in the 1960s, for example, which is I've probably studied the 60s more than any other decade, so I can speak to the 60s more readily. There were so many media outlets that covered baseball that if you found a character, if the media found a character, they were going to write stories about it. Mm-hmm. And they'd be not only in newspapers, but also in multiple magazines. How many magazines are there about baseball right now on the newsstand? If you go to a newsstand in a grocery store right now, I think the answer is probably 0. You might find Baseball Digest, which can, I'm sure, be found somewhere on some newsstand, a big one maybe. But back in the 60s, you would go to a newsstand at a drugstore or wherever, and you might find 8 magazines devoted solely to baseball. And they're going to be filled with stories about Bo Belinsky and Leo DeRocher, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there are some characters out there, but they don't really find national audiences. Aside from the cognoscenti like us, we know who those guys are. I don't think that players generally have less personality. I just think we know less about those guys, so they don't stick. They're not in the public consciousness. They're not national figures. They're certainly not household names, which they used to be. Bo Belinsky was famous for a couple years. He was a national figure. That just wouldn't happen anymore.
Yeah, it's like before 04, everybody thought, Big Papi, he was a great player, a good player, and nothing. And then of course 04 came along and all of a sudden superstardom, and you're watching the Red Sox and they're like, why are you pitching to this guy? And he had Manny Ramirez batting behind him. I mean, pick your poison. Who are you going to pitch to, Manny or Papi? And Papi is a character of the game. I will say that him and Manny being Manny was, it was good.
Pedro Martinez too, I think, had his moments.
Oh yeah. It's Pedro Martinez, one tough Dominican. You don't want to mess with Pedro because he was going to buzz you. He didn't care,
right.
But it just there's still the intense rivalries in baseball: Dodgers, Giants, Cubs, Cardinals, and Red Sox, and some other team from New York that I won't mention. But sorry, Rick. I want to tell you we're gonna have to let you go because you're a Yankee fan. We can't do this. I'm sorry. No, I'm teasing you. We haven't gone round and round about the Red Sox and the Yankees, so that's a good thing, But baseball brought my family together. My nephew's mom hated baseball when I first met her 30 years ago, before my wife and I got married. Now, she's super fan. She literally hated baseball. And of course, she had a kid who was born with a bat and a ball in his hands, and now, super fan, and she'll criticize the managers, which we all do, and people don't realize being a manager is not an easy job. You gotta deal with it, Rob, as 25 massive egos, and you got to figure out how to blend all this stuff together so they don't kill each other in the clubhouse,
26 now.
26.
Oh. And that's
27 coming soon.
you
27 for double headers.
Double headers, that's right.
Yeah, you mentioned that the rosters aren't going to shrink. The union will never have that. That they're not going to go for that. I mean, they'd like to have a 50-man roster if they could. I mean, of course they'd have to build the dugouts a lot bigger, but where are you going to put everybody?
Yes.
But I especially in the playoffs, I can see, maybe adding a pitcher or two, or maybe 2 or 3 guys to the roster, because some of these games, some of these pitchers, they go a long time. If it's in 10th inning and they'll bring a starter in the World Series just to have this guy suck up some innings so they can maybe win a game. And you see it quite a bit. And it takes a lot to be a manager, not just sending somebody up to hit. You got to be a babysitter and psychologist and father figure all rolled into one, because you got all these egos. And I take my hat off to people like Bruce Bochy. I think Boch is the best manager in baseball, because he just knows how to handle a pitching staff, and he knows how to win. He did it in San Francisco and he did it in Texas. It's too bad.
Yeah, he's incredible. I mean, there are some guys that you look at what they do and you can't figure out exactly how they do it. Bochy, Dusty Baker, a few others. It doesn't matter where they're managing; they just figure it out. And I think it's one of the things that we have not figured out as analysts with sabermetrics, is, Bill James wrote a book 20 some years ago about managers, which I think is fantastic, but I don't know that he ever really tried to engage with the question, how do some managers win and others don't? What was special? You can say things like, well, he was good at working with players, or he picked the right guys for the right moments. That's all fine, but I've never yet seen anything that would allow you to go, here's why this guy wins, here's why this guy doesn't. There are a few at the edges who clearly had something figured out, or on the other hand, clearly had never figured it out. But there's a lot in the middle where, who knows? Bruce Bochy, I don't know what his secret is, but he has one.
A lot of people. I grew up watching Nolan Ryan in Anaheim Stadium when there was 5,000 people in the stand. This guy could throw hard, and you'd see guys going up to the plate literally shaking in their boots, because I mean, this guy threw hard, and you knew it was coming. You still weren't going to hit it. And they asked Nolan one time, and this would never, ever, ever happen today. Their agents would have a stroke. They asked him, how many pitches do you throw in one game? What's the most? And he said 239.
Mm-hmm.
That would never happen. That would never happen again, But again, this is a guy who is a complete freak of nature. We may never see another Nolan Ryan in our lifetime.
Oh, I know
we won't. Nobody be allowed to even try to be Nolan Ryan again.
No,
you can't throw and I'm not saying this is wrong or right, but you can't throw 139, let alone 230.
No. Yeah. I mean, Rainey did a lot of that research on, pitches and pitch counts, and where the threshold was for that got it to 120 being like, you don't go over 120 at all. Now it's pretty much 100. If you see somebody go over 100, it's shocking. And one of the things that I always said about baseball that I lament that we don't get to see anymore are feats of greatness in terms of extending themselves, finding what their limit is and what they can do. We're not going to get those types of players again. We're not going to get somebody who's going to play 2,632 consecutive games again, because they won't be allowed to. There's, the workload limits, and we want to try and rest the person up. So people just won't be allowed to witness these great feats of stamina.
If you don't allow pitchers to throw 95 every pitch, maybe we get that back. Right. If you can average 92 and throw 140 pitches in a game, and still be effective enough to throw a no-hitter or pitch a complete game. So I haven't ruled that out yet. I I can tell you, having a little personal experience, that Major League Baseball is actually trying to figure out a way for pitchers to stay in games longer and give us that experience that we don't really get much anymore, because they know fans enjoy it.
Yeah.
You know, I had the fortune of talking to Billy Williams one time at Wrigley Field in Chicago, and we were sitting in the dugout, and I said, Billy, tell me about Sandy Koufax's perfect game, and he's poking me in the chest, you know. He goes, let me tell you something. Beckert was second up, and he goes, Sandy doesn't have shit today. We're going to knock him around. Billy was up fourth, and he goes, we ain't getting shit, boys. We're in for a long night. Sandy, this is another thing. This is like an urban legend, which is, it's totally true. Sandy struck out the last 6 guys in a row on his perfect game, and his hat kept flying off, which it never did. And I said, Billy, how hard was he throwing? He goes, he was throwing all fastballs in the 8th and 9th inning. We knew we weren't going to get anything. And that's how, you know, that's like Nolan Ryan's 239 pitches in one game. It's urban legend, but it happened, you know, and you just have to nod your head to people like that, you know. And Ted Williams hitting 406 and 41, you know, he was 399 8, whatever it was. And Joe Cronin said, you don't have to play. You know, it's 400. And he goes, I'm playing. He goes 6 or 8 in a doubleheader. I mean, come on. That stuff's unheard of, you know, but that's what makes baseball great. These stories like this, you know, Babe Ruth allegedly calling a shot at Wrigley Field, you know, Willie Stargell hitting 2 out of Dodger Stadium, literally out of Dodger Stadium. And you know, things like that. They're urban legends, but they happened. But a lot of that stuff was back in the day when we didn't have, you know, now we've got videotape on everything. You know, if you're going to the bathroom in the clubhouse, they got videotape on it. You know, it's just the cameras are everywhere. And Rob, you know that as an analyst, and it's good and bad in a lot of ways. Because, you know, honestly, I don't want to see a guy spitting or picking his nose in the dugout. It just is not attractive, you know. But being, as you know, we all played, it's commonplace. You know, the dugout is one of the most disgusting places you can ever be. But
one of the challenges to get pitchers throwing more going forward is not just at that Major League Baseball level, is that kids are growing up these days conditioned to think, I'm not supposed to throw more than 100 pitches. I'm not supposed to throw more than 90 pitches. And that you know, that trickled down from the majors down to lower levels, and that is a good thing, because obviously younger arms need more protection as they're developing, to, you know, to make sure that they're not hurting themselves. But you're getting a lot of kids getting injured because they're trying to throw harder. That's their goal. It's not pitching, it's throwing harder. And changing that mindset is really going to be the thing that's going to get us past that, if we can ever change that mindset, because people are so competitive. They want to, oh, that guy throws that hard, I want to throw a little harder.
Yep.
And that's going to be the hard part, to change that thinking, I think.
yeah, I completely agree with you on that, Rick. It's, you know, it's I think I'm not going to say it's too far gone now, but they could do it if they wanted to, but I don't see it happening anytime soon. You know, like the Dodgers signed Ohtani to that $700 million contract. I just rolled my eyes. You know, and he's on his 2nd Tommy John surgery. How many pitchers are effective for long term after their 2nd TJ? Not many. You know, so he's on, you know, they basically, in my mind, I may be wrong, they paid $700 million for a designated hitter. You know,
Right.
that's my feeling. You know, he may come back and pitch next year for a couple of years, but he's not going to live out that contract as a pitcher, I don't think.
Well, I will throw a caveat at you, which is that if you compute the real dollars in that contract, it's nowhere near 700 million, because it's so much of it is pushed way off into the future. There's no way he's not worth anything like $700 million
No.
as a DH, maybe not even as a pitcher, if he comes back and is effective. But if you actually do the real current dollars, they might get their money's worth based on his batting stats and his promotional value. I do think that most contracts that pitchers get are not justifiable. Problem, of course, is that if you're actually trying to win and market your team, it's difficult to do those things if you don't spend any money. So you basically, if you're smart, you know there's a pretty good chance that this contract is not going to look very good in 3 years. But teams feel compelled to do it, and the teams that don't spend that kind of money don't typically win.
Yeah, there's a lot of bad contracts out there. Rendon with the Angels. Oh boy.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think he likes play. I don't think he cares to play. I mean, he said baseball is not really that, not on the front burner for him, which it should be. If you're making, 20, 30 million a year, that better be you better 24/7,
It's really tough for a fan to hear that. That's the
Oh, it
problem.
is. It
The fans
absolutely is.
sometimes are more passionate about it than the players themselves. Not
Oh,
all players, but there are some
absolutely.
players that sure the fans are more passionate about it, and they can't understand that line of thinking either.
Oh, I know. I mean, if you would have told me as a teenager in the 70s, Bob, you're going to make, you know, $2 million being a catcher. I would, I could be a bullpen catcher for that much money. I don't care, It just, I think, I'm probably wrong in this, but a lot of the players, it seems like it's more about the money than anything. You know what I mean? They like the game, but they're not passionate. Um, uh, you know, um, about the game like players were in the old days. And with that, I'm going to end this because I know Rob has some things to do. I want to thank Rob for showing up and giving us some great insight. Rob, the Dale Scott book is awesome. I love that book, especially about the beginning when he talks about getting racked all the time. That is Rick knows, and as we all know as ex-players, it's a cringeworthy moment, but you can laugh at it because it happened to you. And Rob, I really enjoyed talking to you. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while, and I'm glad we got together to do this.
Well, Bob, it's been a pleasure, and Rick, it's been great to reconnect with you after all these years.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Hey, I'm glad I got to bring you guys together,
All
He's
right, thanks,
Rob.
guys. Appreciate it. Take
Rob,
care.
thank you very much. And he's Rob Neyer. Read him whenever you can. Great author. And he's Rick Bender, my sidekick. And we'll see you again next time.
Rob's on Substack these days, so check out his Substack column too.
There you go. See,
You
Rob,
too. Thanks.
you guys you're getting pub. You didn't even know it, right?
Take
Rob,
care.
thanks a lot. Thanks a
bet.
lot, guys. That was a lot of fun.
See ya.
We will talk to you next time on In the Clubhouse. Bye-bye.